All right, we are live. All right, we're live from the Solidarity stage.
I think you should leave it open for a few more minutes.
Yeah, it's going to be very good. I'm sorry. All right, welcome everyone. We are going to get started. You can have a seat. So, wow, I really appreciate everyone for coming out. My name is Hallie Murray. I am chair of the Boston branch of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. I'm also the North Regional Coordinator of USM and a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And I really appreciate everyone for coming out to our panel discussion here at the Left Forum 2019 called Reparations to African People, a Socialist Demand. And this is, we've heard the word reparations is becoming more and more popular these days. We see many presidential candidates endorsing it. There's been other discussions at this conference about reparations, and that needs to be credited to Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party for having put the demand out there for the last 50 years organizing. The first World Tribunal on Reparations to African People was right here in New York City in 1982, led by the African People's Socialist Party. So I just want to, we have two incredible speakers today, Penny and Yejide. I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before that, I'd like to just explain a bit what the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is, what we do, who we are. USM, we are under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We are an organization of white people that was formed by the African People's Socialist Party. And we are under their leadership. We follow democratic centralism. We report back to them. We set goals for what we do, and we actually have a table downstairs in the exhibitions hall. So I'd love for everyone to come out after. You can talk more with us. We have a ton of literature here on what that means. And the African People's Socialist Party has been organizing on the ground for the last 50 years to build African unity, to unite African people everywhere, to have total socialist control of the continent of Africa. And when I say African, I mean black people everywhere. This is a national identity that's been adopted by the members and supporters of the African People's Socialist Party. And they're just an incredible organization fighting for black power, total end of parasitic capitalism and imperialism, and uniting Africa to be truly free with their access and control of their own resources. Our second principle of unity is that we stand in solidarity with African self-determination. That means, us in the white solidarity movement, we don't set the standards, we don't offer input. We are under their leadership. I'm a member because I fully unite with the direction and the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And we support black self-determination, not just African, but any colonized peoples struggling to be free from imperialism. We support Venezuelan people, the Palestinians, the Vietnamese people, all colonized and oppressed peoples around the world fighting for freedom from parasitic capitalism. And our third principle of unity is that we organize in the white community for reparations to African people. And this really, defines our work. We don't tell colonized, we don't go into the black community and tell them what to do. We've been doing that for 600 years. We organize our own people with the message of reparations under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and it's truly the most principled place for white people to be involved in the black liberation struggle is through, being under the leadership of the African working class. So I would like to, of course, appreciate deeply our chairman, Omali Yeshitela. He founded the Uhuru movement back in the 60s. Uhuru is a Swahili word that means freedom, so you'll often hear us greeting each other and using that, and African people use that now to keep freedom on their minds at all times. And Chairman has he's never given up for the last 50 years. In the 60s, the Black Power Revolution was militarily crushed by the United States government, and he held strong through that time and built an entire organization. So salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I also would like to salute Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, who leads the economic work of the African People's Socialist Party. She leads Black Star Industries, and the current project of Black Star Industries that she's leading right now is called the Black Power Blueprint, which we're really excited to tell you more about during this project. Just incredible. There's over 50 Black economic development institutions of the Uhuru movement that she leads. So huge salute to Deputy Chair. And of course, I'd like to salute our keynote speaker today, President Yejide Orunmila, who will be giving a presentation later. She is president of the African National Women's Organization, which is an organization that deals specifically with the special oppression of African women. And ANWO, as it's called, is also tabling downstairs. We're sharing a table with them, so please come out after to see the amazing beauty products that ANWO has. There's also some literature here as well. And I would also like to salute my direct leadership in the Solidarity movement, Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC, Penny Hess, who's here. She'll be presenting. Penny Hess was the first white person in history to really answer the call of the African liberation struggle to work under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and build an entire movement of white people who support and pay reparations to African people. And she's been chair of APSC back since the 70s, so I really salute Penny. And my direct leadership, Chair Jesse Neville, National Chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, just incredibly powerful organizer. USM, we are an international organization, so we have branches in many parts of the country, and you can become a member. You can become a member right now. Go to uhurusolidarity.org. So that's, saluting leadership is really important to us because everything that I'm saying throughout this workshop, I learned from leadership of the African working class. So this is the basic principle of the Uhuru Solidarity movement. We believe that all white people owe reparations to African people. This includes white queers, white disabled, white workers, white transgender. All white people owe reparations to African people because of our historic complicity in genocide. I'm sure you don't own an enslaved African. I don't either, but that's not the point. It's that we've participated in the complicity. We never stood up. We never, because we benefited from the system. So this is what we believe, and this workshop is really going to deepen that and explain it. Penny Hess's presentation will really just deepen that, and her presentation, which will be next right after this, is about just the legacy of violence that white people have committed, just laying out the facts, and also how we can overturn it. It can be depressing just looking at all this violence that we've committed, but it's really important to know that we don't have to die with the sinking ship of capitalist colonialism. Like white people, we can jump off that pedestal and unite with the direction of African working class people to liberate themselves. And the whole basis of this workshop is about reparations and what that means. So I'd like to bring up our first speaker, Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Yes, I want to say uhuru, and uhuru means freedom in Swahili. So that is what the African People's Socialist Party uses to greet and to talk to people, and I think it's a very powerful thing because the freedom of African people and all oppressed and homeless peoples has to be on our minds every day. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody for coming, and this workshop is not a feel-good workshop. It's not an easy workshop because this is not something that's about charity or an easy fix or something like that. This goes to the heart of the question, and without dealing with what we're going to talk about today, there can never be an end to war. There can never be an end to oppression. There can never be an end to capitalism, and we're in a period when, as Chairman Omali Shatella says, the crisis of imperialism is so deep that will it even exist? Will human beings exist on this planet? Well, it's sure as hell not going to under the system of capitalism and imperialism that exists today, and we want to talk about that. So, yeah, I just want to start by saying that I am the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and I want to reiterate that that is an organization that was founded by the African People's Socialist Party, led by Chairman Omali Shatella, that's his picture right there, who has been working for the liberation of Africa and African people since the 1960s. entire period, and he came to the conclusion in 1972 that it could not be just a loose or kind of organization, that there had to be a party led by and working in the interests of the African working class and poor. Because without that, it could never win. It could never win. And that's what the chairman has been summing up. Because the last period of the Black Power movement that I lived through was crushed by the U.S. government, assassinating Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. They're still trying to destroy who these leaders are today in so many ways. Fred Hampton and so many others. That was called COINTELPRO. It was a counterinsurgency program that was targeting the African Revolution, and it knew and said that the main contradiction in the world today is not, white leftists or even the anti-war movement or white hippies, but the African Revolution, the Black Power movement, created the deepest crisis for imperialism since the Civil War, they said. So they understood that. And so the chairman founded the African People's Socialist Party in 1972, and in 1976 he formed the African People's Solidarity Committee, whose goal was to really extend the African Revolution into the heart of white power. Because that's not the responsibility of African workers, that's our responsibility. So this is not, we don't have a charity kind of relationship. We have a relationship that unites with and attempts to, deeper and deeper every day with the way that African people experience the world and see the world. So I want to definitely welcome Yejide Orunmila, who's going to be speaking today. Just an incredible and brilliant speaker and leader of the African People's Socialist Party. We're really excited and very honored to have Yejide with us today. She is a member of the National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, and also the leader and president, chair of the African National Women's Organization, which is a very, very powerful organization bringing African women into the struggle for the liberation, the total liberation of African people everywhere. So, I want to start by saying that. I want to join in saluting Chairman Omali Shatella, who believed in us as white people that we could begin to see the world, as African people and take a principled stand. And Deputy Chair Omali Shatella, who leads the political and economic work that so many of us from the Solidarity Committee are part of. So, this question of reparations is very, very critical, and the African People's Socialist Party, as Hallie said a little bit about, has fought for reparations and had a goal of having reparations be a household word for the last 40 years or more, but the understanding of reparations is not just for slavery, not just for stolen labor, but for everything, And so this is why we have to understand this. This is a picture of the first tribunal on reparations to African people that was held right here in Brooklyn at the, I think it's now called the John Jay College, not Medgar Evers, it was downtown. Brooklyn Tech, yeah. And that was in 1982 at the auditorium there. And that was really powerful. It wasn't a mock trial, but it used international law and the right of an oppressed people to bring their struggle to a world court when it is not heard by the colonizer country. And they used all of the human rights documents, the conventions on genocide, and many other documents of the United Nations as the basis for this. And it had an international panel of judges that heard this trial. There were experts who gave testimony, including Professor Leonard Jeffries on the history of African people in the world, and Afeni Shakur, actually the mother of Tupac Shakur, spoke at that. Learned of Panther 21. There was, political prisoners. There was Akila Jundi, who was a member of the Attica brothers who had fought in Attica in 1972, and just so many others, experts and the people speaking at this 2-day hearing. It was really, really amazing. And the judges ruled that the U.S. government was guilty of genocide to African people and owed $4.1 trillion to African people. So this is again Chairman Omali Shatella. He was just asked to speak actually at Oxford University a couple of months ago, and that's him. He kicked ass. If you want to see it, it was amazing. He laid out the basis for the struggle of African people for total liberation, and the understandings of parasitic capitalism and how it was built in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that has gone viral. So if you want to go to the Oxford Union or to Burning Seer TV, you can see this. It's very, very powerful. This is, go the right way here. So, so we are starting with the premise that Chairman Omali Shatella has led in political theory that's called African internationalism. And this is not a political theory to just examine the world or explain the world, but to change the world. It's an understanding that demands that we do something about it, and we've got to. Can we leave this world to another generation?
No.
I don't think so. No way. We have to take up the struggle. We have to do this, but it has to be in an organized way that is led by the African working class, and I'm going to say why on that. Because the first thing that Chairman Omali Shatella tells us is, and it's so true, is that capitalism was born from the assault on Africa, the turning of African human beings into commodities for sale, creating the first stock markets, the beginning of capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, and the enslavement of African people, the theft of their genius, their brilliance, their art, their everything stolen from them, and their land and resources of Africa, which continue to be plundered today, along with the stolen land here of the indigenous people, the genocide against the indigenous people, the theft of their gold and silver and everything else that's here, and the colonization of the entire world. That's how capitalism was born. Capitalism was born, as the chairman says, from imperialism, not the other way around. Because Europe was poor. I mean, today, this year is the, I think it was 1419, when the Portuguese left Portugal and began the assault on Africa 600 years ago. Europe at that time was under feudalism. Even all white people were poor, had no land, nothing. Not even shirts on their backs usually. No rights. That was feudalism. So what changed that? What changed the world to capitalism? Where did all this capital come from? And it came from the assault on Africa. And this is why, before I get to that, we say that all white people sit on this pedestal of the exploitation of African and colonized people. And I'm not saying that all white people are the 1%. I'm not saying that we're all rich or anything else, but what I'm saying is that we have social wealth. We have a completely different way of seeing the world and experiencing the world than anybody else on this planet, including African, indigenous, Spanish-speaking, Mexican people inside the borders of the United States. Because we have colonialism here, too, don't we? We have two Americas. We have two Americas. We do not experience the possibility that our children are going to be shot down by the police while they went out to the grocery store for us or something. We don't experience that. We don't experience, white people now are having a drug epidemic, and we're able to, now we're supposed to understand this. White people in a crisis and all this kind of thing. But the U.S. government and this has come out in many, many hearings, Iran-Contra and everything else, The US government put crack cocaine into the African community as a form of the counterinsurgency to make sure that African people would never rise up and struggle again. And they did that consciously, and they wiped out much of the African community's own economic development and economic institutions and businesses that existed before that. They called it urban renewal. They always put freeways in every city of right where key African communities were. And they replaced that with a drug economy and have used that to pack the jails and the prisons of this country with African people. So that, I mean, you know, it's incredible. I mean, this country has so many people in prison that we have 2.3 million people in prison. And when you add all of the people who are in the court system, that you're talking about people awaiting trial, on probation, in trial, on parole, you're talking about 13 million people inside the United States are tied to the prison system. And at least 50% of them are African. And the rest, the majority of the rest are Mexican, indigenous, and white people are just a little percentage of that. And, you know, China has over 1 billion people, like 1.5 billion people. They have, their percentage of people in prison is 110 per 100,000. In this country, it's something like 3,000 per 100,000. And the majority of them are African. And they always say, oh, China, human rights violations. Well, they don't have, you know, they have something like 1.5 million people in prison in China. We have 13 million tied to the prison system every single year. This is colonialism. This is the gulag. This is the human rights violations against African people that exist inside this country against African and oppressed people. So we say that all white people owe reparations because, one, we have social wealth. Yeah, it's a thing. It's a statistic that a poor white family can more easily raise $3,000 in a crisis than an African middle-class family. That's a statistic. You can look that up. Because of social wealth. Because you don't have it, but your grandmother does, or somebody does, and you live with social wealth around you. And African people live with social poverty all around them. And, you know, this is the reality. We experience democracy. African community does not. Does not. Democracy is used against African people inside this country. So we say all white people owe reparations. So one of the things that we do is, from the African People Solidarity Committee, is to what we call quantify, because we want to show, and this could go on for hours, but I tried to shorten this, but we want to show some of the things that we have participated in as white people towards African people that have made so much money. Not just that there are atrocities of crimes against humanity that we're responsible for and participated with our government in, but also how much money did that generate for this system. And I want to show you some things of what it means. And, you know, Karl Marx, by the way, he talked about the primitive accumulation of capital. And that means, and that is such a white way of saying, what he was talking about was, the fact is, at the very end of his book, Capital, I'm on page like 840 or something, as a kind of an afterthought, he's saying, well, where did the startup capital for capitalism come from? And he said, well, it came from turning Africa into a warren for the hunting of black skins. He talked about the enslavement of African people. He was talking about the indigenous people being sent down into the gold and silver mines and worked to death, and the theft of their land. He was talking about even the opium wars that England waged against China to force them to smoke opium and make money in return for tea, which China was like, hell no, we're not doing that. And they fought back, and where the money came from capitalism. But it took Chairman Omali Yeshitela to translate that if he understands that the colonized people, that African people, indigenous people, are the cornerstone, the foundation of capitalism, then obviously they will and must lead the struggle against capitalism and imperialism, and not white workers. Not white workers. White workers have jobs because of the stolen resources from Africa and every place else. So this is a really important thing that Chairman Omali Yeshitela talks about. So capitalism was born on the assault on Africa, on colonialism, enslavement, genocide, plunder, and rape. And enslavement, the enslavement of African people was the most terror that was against them, used against African people every day. So to survive, they had to produce. And I don't know if you ever read, like, say, 12 Years a Slave, or, the very few accounts that exist of Africans who survived the enslavement. But he talks about how if African people did not make their quota for picking cotton, they were beaten horribly every single day until they made their quota. So there was violence daily, and that this labor, this stolen labor, created just an explosion of wealth that the world had never seen before. There had never been, all of a sudden, Spain was wealthy, Portugal, England, France, all of these countries, this wealth came. They had the Renaissance, they had all of these things, education and all of these things for the first time, and this came at the expense of African people. And that in 1415, impoverished feudal Europe launched an assault from Portugal to West Africa. And within a few years, Portugal had stolen 500 tons of gold from Africa. 500 tons. And that is incredible. If they took all the gold out of Africa, especially West Africa and Ghana. Yeah. And that today, just as a thing, Portugal has one of the largest reserves of gold in the world. It still has a lot of this. It still has 383 tons, worth 12.1 billion euros. And this is what it means. And that the kidnapping, sale, and stolen labor of African people over 200 years is estimated to have brought at least $7.5 trillion, trillion British pounds, or $9.8 trillion into the British economy. And that between 1619 and 1865, African people in the U.S. performed 222 million hours of forced labor. And with interest and today's currency, this would be worth $97 trillion today. Today. So when we say everything is owed, everything is owed. And that the London stock market, the New York Wall Street is literally sitting on the top, on the graves of enslaved African people. What could be a better, perfect picture of what this country is built on? And that the stock market, Barclays Bank, Lloyd's of London, all of it was built in direct relationship to their funding and insuring and everything else, the enslavement, the assault on African people. So 50% of all kidnapped African people were stolen, kidnapped, and enslaved in the Caribbean sugar plantations, which provided Europe with 90% of its sugar. And sugar was then the oil of today. Sugar was then the oil of today. And I would say, of course, the sale of African people was the oil of today. But sugar was the crop that was key to the world economy at that time. And in 1850, every European ate 36 pounds of sugar a year. I could not find a number to that, but that is billions of dollars worth of sugar. And it's still today, the whole world eats sugar. And so more riches flowed to Britain from the slave economy of Jamaican sugar plantations than all the original American 13 colonies put together. So when Britain outlawed chattel slavery, which they did in 1838, they paid reparations to the slave masters. To the slave masters, they paid 46,000 British and Scottish owners of African people an equivalent of $20 billion. $20 billion for the loss of their property, and that was nearly 800,000 enslaved African people in the Caribbean and Africa for the British. And I just read an article in The Guardian about a month or so ago admitting that money, that $20 billion coming into Scotland, it was talking about Scotland, was what built the infrastructure of that country. Without it, it still would have been completely, agricultural, no roads, everything. That is what built the economic and even, the physical infrastructure of Scotland and certainly of Britain, of England as well. And that the $20 billion, which was 40% of the British Treasury at the time, built the infrastructure of Scotland. British had built the universities, banks, bridges, roads, and the economic system that existed. So in the U.S., the enslavement of African people built the entire economy. And of course, it was on stolen land, on the mass of stolen land from the indigenous people. And I read today, I was trying to figure out, what would be the worth of the land, the real estate of the United States today, and it's saying $23 trillion. The genocide of the indigenous people brought in $23 trillion, at least, to the U.S. economy, and that is really low. That is very, very low, actually, estimate. And that in 1860 alone, 4 million enslaved Africans in the U.S. were worth $3.5 billion, the largest single financial asset in the entire U.S. economy. That has been an article that's been in the New York Times, Forbes, and everything else. That African people were the greatest asset, not railroads, not factories, not land. African people were the greatest asset in the United States. We're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And this is what we experience in this country as white people, sitting on this pedestal. Not that we have this in our hands, but we are part of America. We have the ability to send our children to college, to aspire to buy a house, to have a job, to have democracy based on this relationship that we have had and always had to African people. So that more than 1 in 5 households in the South owned African people. 1 in 5. And that 1 in 200 owned 50 or more enslaved people. And there's so much more that we can say about all this. But cotton was 60% of U.S. total exports in 1860. 2 billion pounds of cotton were produced by enslaved African people in that year alone. That year alone. That the cotton trade between New York City and the southern states was worth $200 billion. And so after the importation from Africa of Africans into the U.S. was banned in 1808 in the U.S., going on a ship and capturing Africans became illegal in 1808, not the enslavement of African people. The U.S. began to force African men and women to breed babies in pens. Do you know that? I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and there's a plaque that says, Garrison Slave Pens. That's a plaque, a historical plaque. plaque. I have a picture of it on my phone. And, you know, this is how billions of dollars, millions of dollars and billions of dollars were made by selling African children. So the forced rape of African people and the theft of their children is called, by the woman who wrote the book, The Slave Coast, she called it the second phase of enslavement that people hardly talk about.
Yeah.
But it was what? It was almost 60 years of that. And the end of the importation of African people from Africa, of course, was not humanitarian because it created higher prices for African people inside the borders of the United States through stealing babies and everything else. And there's much more I can say about that. But in 1840, the cost of an African human being in the U.S. rose to $10,000 and more in today's U.S. dollar.
Wow.
And Thomas Jefferson was one of the people who, quote unquote, pioneered this. He sold children. He had people know this about him, right? He had a factory, a nail factory on his land that little children worked in, and he basically pitted them against each other so that they would fight. And, you know, it was hideous. But he knew that he made his money through selling African children and enslaving them. So they also started, when they began, quote, breeding African people, they started what's called a coffle. You know what a coffle is? Coffles are where African people were chained throat to throat and hand to hand and walked from, say, the breeding place was Virginia, walked to Arkansas. Forced marches. Did you know, down the highways and everything. This is coming out today. You know, that these coffles, this is what happened, this terror, this torture. And that, you know, this brought in billions of dollars. Now, I just wanted to say a couple more things really quickly. One is that there was a real thing called the 40 acres and a mule. I didn't know that it really happened. I thought it was an idea. Well, I wanted to say this about it. That what happened was, at the end of the Civil War, General Sherman he set on fire from Savannah, Georgia to Atlanta, to the sea, for the slave masters. We always hear about that. So he met with some African people, like a lot of them were preachers or whatever, they were leaders, and he said, what do African people want? And they said, there was 20 African leaders, and they said, we want land and we want self-determination. And so the 40 acres, the mule is iffy, that didn't really happen, but the 40 acres was in fact, so what Sherman did is, he declared on January 1st, 1865, that 400,000 acres were set aside for African people. That is 238 miles from Charleston, South Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, 30 miles wide from the Atlantic coast, and all the sea islands were given to African people. And a lot of Africans went there that day. They're like, we're going. And then they took it away. After Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson took that away and that was land taken from the slave masters, white, you know, enslavement masters, and it was given back to them after that. So I found something that was saying that, and that was called Order 15, Field Order 15, and you can look that up. It was a real thing. And there's a website that says that the taking away of that land is worth, you know, from resources that should have gone to African people, that would have added up to $6.5 trillion. Because you're not just talking about this land, this 238 miles of now on the Atlantic coast where every house is like $1 million, you know, and the worth of that land today, but also you're talking about 150 years where people could have worked it, made a living, increased the value of their land, passed it down, had social wealth, passed it down from generation to generation, had to pay taxes on it, because the way that, all this kind of thing. this value would have been worth $6.5 trillion to African people today. And that is so critical. And so during Reconstruction, I don't have time to talk about that, but that was an amazing period. But while the British paid $200 billion to the slave masters, to the slave owners for the loss of their property, the U.S. had convict leasing. Do people know what convict leasing is? Mm-hmm. It's called worse than slavery. It's where, in the southern states, now the state was the slave master and gave out to the former slave, the slave owners to be able to rent Africans.
Today we call it job training.
Yeah.
Today we call it job training.
Job training, yes. All right, so.
If I mistake, you said 200 billion paid out, but the thing says 20 billion.
Okay, it was 20 billion. It was 20 billion. All right, so there's a book called One Dies Get Another, or Worse Than Slavery. And the point I wanted to make in terms of white people, that after the Civil War, you always, see this picture of the former slaves. Now they're poor and they can't farm, they don't have any money. But actually, I read a study just recently that by 1880, that the families of the former slave masters were now richer than they were during slavery. Because of convict leasing is one key reason why. So this is more on the convict leasing. This rebuilt the wealth of the South after the Civil War. It went up into the 1940s and even 1950s. And places like the Angola prison, that was based on convict leasing. That's still in, it's a prison farm. And it's still there today. So return the wealth to the South. And how many millions, this is another thing. This government pays out pain and suffering to people when they sue for something that happened to them. For example, I read about a woman who went to McDonald's and they spilled, in the drive-by window, they spilled coffee on her, and she sued them, and they scalded her, and she sued them, and they paid her $1 million in pain and suffering. Well, what is the lynching? What is 10,000? Just all the terror against African people that we carried out as regular white people. What is that? What is that worth? Yeah. How many millions and trillions of dollars is that worth? I just also wanted to make one other point, that in addition to the fact that African people were given 400,000 acres and then it was taken back, and Reconstruction and everything that happened, constant terror against the African population, that by the turn of the 20th century, that African people owned collectively actually 16 million acres of land. And of that, 11 million acres have been taken away. And in fact, today, collectively, African people in this country own 1 million acres of land today. Wow. And it's just like that we say, that we always tell the statistics that white people have at least 10 to 40 times the assets, the wealth of African people. Like the average white assets, I'm not talking about income, it's like $165,000. And in some places like Boston, for Africans, it's $8. Yeah. And in some places, it might be $3,600. But that is the variable. And I read another article that said that in the next 10 years, if the situation goes, if there's not revolution, African people's assets will be zero. So the point I want to make is that African people are in worse condition today, economically, politically, in terms of the violence, than they were at the end of the enslavement of African people. So this is why the chairman says it's parasitic capitalism. This is why everything is owed. These are some of the things they said. And the African People's Socialist Party is very, very serious about self-government about revolution, about taking over Africa as their birthright, as getting rid of the borders imposed by Europe, and all of the wealth, everything that they created for somebody else to have a New York City, for somebody else to have an Amsterdam and a Paris. For white people, African people are going to take that back. I support that. And if we as white people want to have a future on this planet, we have to be under the leadership of the African working class and the African revolution. I'm sure as hell not going to be under the leadership, I'm sorry, of the white left. Because I'll tell you this, no, what is a white worker anyway? You know, it's an opportunist who's gotten everything at the expense of African people. Everything. I have a whole book on that. And that the fact is that the foundation of this entire system is leading this struggle. And that's why we see the crisis of imperialism today. And that's why I stand in solidarity with the right of African people to be free and liberated. This is some of the projects of the African People Socialists right now, the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis, where this is Yejide carrying the flag. And the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis, where they're taking some of the old buildings and renovating them with a lot. That's part of Black Power, is part of the right of African people to have power, economic and political power over their lives, and through a lot of support and reparations as well from the white community. They demolished some of these condemned buildings. Because the north side of St. Louis looks like Syria. You know, it looks like a war is going on there. And you cross what's called the Delmar Avenue Divide, and it looks like mansions and, you know, all that. So these are some of the projects of the Black Power Blueprint, and we stand for reparations to African people. We feel that reparations is not punitive. It is the way that we can rectify our relationship to African people, to take responsibility for it, to make a self-criticism for it, and to join in a principled way in being part of humanity and being part of a world in which all human beings can live, nobody at the expense of anybody else. That is the future of this planet. That's what I'm going to be part of, and that's what we fight for. So I really urge everybody today from the white community to join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. We have so many different programs and works and projects under the leadership of the party. It's very dynamic, very, very incredible organization. So, you know, just really want to thank everybody today. Looking forward to hearing from President Yejide, and want to say unity through
Reparations. Let's give another hand for Chairwoman Penny Hess. Incredible presentation, just really laying it out. And for anyone that's interested, she did mention it, Penny is also an author of this incredible book, Overturning the Culture of Violence. Critical reading, especially for white people. This is our legacy. You know, this presentation was like a condensed version of this book. So if you'd like to, you know, learn more, and you know, there's sources all in here. We are selling copies of this down. There's one here, and we have some at our table downstairs at the Uhuru Planet table. So next up, I'd like to bring our keynote speaker today, President Yejide Orunmila. She's president of the African National Women's Organization. Really incredible African revolutionary. So thank you, Yejide.
Uhuru.
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 Okay. So again, my name again is Yejide Orunmila. I've been with the African People Socialist Party for the past 10 years. And I am a member of the National Central Committee of the party, which is the highest body in the party. And I sit on that panel as the president of the African National Women's Organization, which was organized in 2015. So Penny laid out a lot of history that I'm sure some of us knew little bits and pieces of, and it really helped you know, this room understand like the significance of what we say and how we organize, and the basis for our organizing, and even the basis for our political theory, African internationalism. And I just want to say that as the president of the African National Women's Organization, my identity first is an African. Okay? That is my primary identity. I'm a woman second. And part of that identity is recognizing that the way that African women, as a part of the entire African nation, experience the violence and contradictions that are evident in our lives is a part of the whole colonial question. The enslavement, the attack on Africa, the taking away of our resources, the theft of our skills, our labor, and so much more, and so many other nuances that aren't really talked about in generalities when we talk about the history of African women as a part of the whole colonial question. And so when I, as the president of the African National Women's Organization, organize African women, I organize around the whole question of ending colonialism, ending capitalism as a path to our freedom, and that is the basis for how we experience life under capitalism, parasitic capitalism, colonialism. So I also am the daughter of two Africans who were born not here in the United States. They were born in Jamaica and Grenada. And I'm saying this because Penny laid out a really great and dynamic history of help give everyone a scope of like how this impacted Africans all over the world and primarily here in the United States. And she actually made a little piece there around the whole question of the sugar plantations in Jamaica, which my great-grandfather was a sugar plantation farmer and had to undergo some really serious conditions, losing limbs just to produce the sugar that Europe enjoyed in their tea. And so this thing that happened to African people is not just something that happened here, and I'm sure that everybody here knows that, but that is the full scope and the disbursement of African people all around the world, and it impacted us in so many different ways. So, as an African internationalist, I'm a communist. And reparations, this discussion of reparations is tied directly to the whole question of making the revolution, and that revolution being led by the African poor and working class. The history laid out shows you that capitalism was based on the attack of Africa, the enslavement of Africa, the stealing of our resources, 200 or more years of free labor that created wealth for the white population, which at first was just like Penny said, a feudal society, warring tribe who were trying to beat each other. But now they had an opportunity. They were so desperate that they had to send out their best seafarers into the world they thought into a world they thought was flat. So they thought they was going to actually fall off the edge of the world. But they were so desperate to look for some new avenues of wealth and exploitation that they sent them out, not knowing if they would fall off the edge of the world. And what they ended up landing on was different lands of different peoples. Africa and what's now been called the United States, the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. And in this process, we all know what happened, right? They went about the wholesale slaughter of indigenous people, the exploitation of just killing people left and right, stealing wealth from all over the place. And this was the basis for the attack on Africa. That the workers that they had, Europe, Portugal primarily, had influence in Africa. They have been there for a number of years, and now it's like, listen, let's go ahead and take these Africans and farm them out to the rest of the world so they can create us wealth. So therefore, the parasitic relationship begins, right? So now, at our own expense, we create wealth. The white people of the world, at that point, which weren't very many, were now benefiting from the labor of our people, not the labor of their people who were dying off in droves, the labor of our people. So now a dying, dirty, rat-infested, disease-infested Europe is now coming together around the whole question of colonizing and enslaving Africa, right? So there was no Paris, there was no like Europe as we know it. There was just these little pockets of European tribes. And now they had to negotiate for the exploits of Africa. Mm-hmm. That's why they began to form Europe, right? They had to figure out, well, you got this part of the land that I can steal slaves from, or Africans from. You have this part of the land that I can, and then I'm going to colonize this place that we've already killed people at in the Caribbean, or here in the United States, or here in India, or here, wherever, to take these enslaved Africans too. And so now they started to arrange themselves, to negotiate themselves in partnership to exploit Africa, to kill Africans. And this is just the attack on Africa with regards to enslavement of African people. Because many years after, like in the late 1800s, I believe, There was a man called Leopold in Congo who used Congo as his own personal playground, killing millions of African people, maiming millions more, cutting off hands and feet, just some poisonous type of thing. Millions of African people wiped off the face of the planet in a period of like maybe 10 years. Do we know about Rwanda?
Yeah.
They said that we are the ones who are the basis for killing our own self. 1 million people gone. I don't even know. I think it was a shorter amount of time. But that was all planted there by European exploitation, European colonialism that continues to plague our lives today. So when we, as the African People's Socialist Party, talk about reparations, we talk about it in terms of everything that happened up until 2 seconds ago, or now 1 second ago, and now at this moment. Right? It happens because of we are experiencing the police in our streets. We're experiencing the theft of our children, which, by the way, was one of the things that we talked about in the United Nations piece on genocide. This is what happens when someone of one group commits genocide against the other. They go ahead and displace you, gentrification. They take your children and take you from one group and send you to the other, foster care. They go ahead and police you, the police. I mean, there's so many different other nuances that up until it happened to white people didn't apply to black people. Millions of African people died in the sea. Millions more died on the continent of Africa. Millions more died in the United States and around the world. But never, ever was the word genocide used when white people committed genocide against us. It was only used, the word was first used when they first used it against themselves. When European Hitler, when it went through Europe and started killing all the Jews. That's when it first emerged as a term. And so our work in the African People's Socialist Party, me as a party member, recognizes that my freedom is inextricably tied to the whole question of overturning this whole entire system of capitalism, which is based on my exploitation. That without that, no African woman, child, man, trans, whoever will ever see freedom if we are to live underneath a system of capitalism. And that socialism is not social welfare, it's not social programs. It's when the workers take power and own the means of production. So it's not about having free health care only. It's not just about doing this social program or that social program. It's about making a revolution and changing the way that society functions in general. And so if we're not talking about that, then we're not talking about socialism. And if we understand these numbers that Penny put up here in terms of reparations, then we recognize that if U.S. imperialism or international imperialism decides to give people, African people, what they owe, it would totally bankrupt their entire system. It would create a groundswell of resources that would be pushed back into the African nation that will allow for us to lay the basis for our world free from oppression and colonialism and violence and murder that has been a part of our existence for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that's why when we talk about making a revolution, some people might think that we're a little bit crazy. How are we going to make a revolution? And I'm just like, we're going to start block by block, city by city, until we can win every African, every other person in solidarity to us to actually be a part of that, making that revolution. And it's possible. Because since 1972, Chairman Omali Shatella has built from St. Petersburg, Florida, an international support for the African Revolution, and has built the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement overall to make this demand around getting our freedom. So I'm not satisfied with just free health care or even free school. I want freedom. I have a daughter who's trying to live her black girl magic and be out here in the world and enjoy life, and I really want her to be able to do that. But I also know that when she was in Las Vegas, she was confronted by the police because they thought that she was a hooker because she was in one of the nice hotels. And this is the things that happen to our people on a daily basis that we have to swallow. That we have to swallow because that's just the way it is. And I'm telling Africans and anybody else who really unites with this message today to join organization, because it's not going to be an individual revolution. It's not going to be a United States revolution. It's going to be a revolution of African people who are leading our own way out of this thing. And we're asking for other people who recognize that it's our responsibility. That's why I've been in this work for a very long time, not as long as others. That's why I'm committed to it, because I want to see a world that's free for my daughter, where we can use our own resources so that, you know what, my family moved here because they were chasing their resources, right? It was nothing. I mean, if you go to Caribbean right now, what do you see? It is basically a slave plantation, a tourist slave plantation. You go to hotels and you got in Grenada they had the ladies in the white outfits at a regular hotel serving you food. And, you know, these are the types of things that they create. And that outside of the resorts and the hotels, poverty. African people are living in the worst kind of poverty there. But you don't see that on TV because that's not what capitalism wants you to see. At the same type of exploitation that existed 100 years ago is still something that exists today in the most bare, laid out process. Convict leasing, that happens right now. Right now.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, there's some, and it happens to us as African people, it happens to other colonized people. As a matter of fact, it happens, like I know of a case where in Georgia somewhere, they frequently stop Mexican immigrants or anybody who's from this Mexican looking, and because their immigration status may be questionable, they will put them in jail. And what do they do on the weekend? Because they want them to work during the week. When they go in jail on the weekend, what do they do in jail on the weekend? They paint the jail. They fix up the things that are inside the jail. These are the things that are happening right now. So, you know, again, like we're not satisfied with this whole question of just allowing for society to maintain itself, just living under capitalism because it might provide some sort of comfort. I want to be uncomfortable. I want this whole entire system to die. I want every single thing tied with the exploitation of me and myself and my people, and that's making the world die itself. It's not just that it's impacting me as an African person, but look at what it's doing to the world. Look at how we're experiencing wars. Like, there's not been a day that I've been alive, I'm 40 years old, that I haven't heard of some type of war that's happening somewhere, some intervention that must be had because somewhere U.S. imperialism has to stick their toes in. And even recognizing that on the continent of Africa and in our streets here in the United States, that the things that are happening between African people are by proxy. And there are bigger things. U.S. imperialism is working to undermine the solidarity of African people. Right before us, there was, I think, a discussion around Cameroon. I don't know if anybody knows what's happening in Cameroon, but there's this Anglophone side and a Francophone side, and they're fighting each other, killing, thousands of people. These are the things that are happening that continue to permeate African communities. Bloods and the Crips kill each other. I like you. Stepped on my sneaker, I might kill each other. Like, these are things that happen in a bubble when you are talking about an oppressed African community that has had everything stripped from us and don't have anything and try to cling to something and try to use whatever means necessary to get the same thing white people got. So I'm going to sell this drug so I can give you some nice shoes, nice car, get a little house or whatever, or more than that, because we want the same thing that white people got. Matter of fact, what white people got belonged to me. Every single thing. That when my father worked for 40, 50 years, breaking his back to survive in this country, can't even afford a house in Grenada. Can't even afford to live in Africa, can't even travel anywhere. We can't even go to Africa, as most of us, if we really wanted to. We can't travel there. It's about $1,600, $1,700 on the flight. So these are the ways that we are keeping together. And in the African People's Socialist Party, we are all Africans. We don't delineate between African American, African from Cameroon, because Cameroon in and of itself is not even the name of the African people who are there, because Cameroon is Portuguese or French for what? Shrimp. Oh. So they're the shrimp people. And so these are the names and the languages that we learn. So if an African is different from me because he speaks English or he speaks French or he speaks Spanish or Portuguese, but those are the languages of the colonizer.
Yeah.
Those are the identities of the colonizer. I'm speaking English right now because my people were colonized by English people, British. And they were brought here by the English. And we were forced here by the French. Grenada was first colonized by the French and then by the English, and then that's how my name changed. And so I don't even have an African name. My birth name was not Yejide Orunmila. It's something that I gave to myself. But these are the things that really identify African people, and what we're saying is the African People's Socialist Party is the thing that brings us all together.
Yes.
So within this party, within this work, we don't make any specifications around whether or not you were born on the continent of Africa, whether you were born in the Caribbean, whether you were born here. We are all one people. And as all one people, we have to see our trajectory as one trajectory, that we have to get free. That is the only and end goal, freedom or nothing. And so we have to do it by recognizing that we have to be a part of organization. We ain't gonna do it as an individual. We might have the best ideas in the world, or we might think that we're the smartest person in the world. But if you're not really contributing to the forward motion of the African Revolution, then you're just a smart person by yourself. And that wouldn't it be lovely to be connected with Africans from Sierra Leone and Cameroon and the Caribbean and in the state, in New Jersey, and all these other places, I mean, really, and working toward African freedom. So, you know, socialism, reparations as a socialist demand is really tied to the whole question of really making the African Revolution, because there's nothing else that is going to free this entire world. When we say we want the leadership of the poor working class to have socialist control of our resources in Africa, that is going to, you know who's in Africa right now? China, United States, all European countries, United States military, French military, Portuguese military, Chinese military, all of them are in Africa right now. Everybody else has an Africa plan. What about our African plan?
Yes.
We have to have an Africa plan that isn't about mimicking white capitalism. We have to have an African plan that is about taking control of our resources and using those resources to pave our streets, to put lights, electricity running up and down, to have flying cars if we want to, because we have all the resources in Africa. We would have the best cell phones, because coltan comes from where? Congo. And without the coltan from Congo, there wouldn't be one cell phone in this room. There wouldn't be one murder in Congo either. Because that's why there's all the conflict in Congo since the beginning. It's because of all of the natural resources in Congo. The Congo is the heart of Africa. I think the third largest rainforest in the world is in Congo, and it's being cut down at an astronomical rate. And the dam that is in Congo right now can power, the hydroelectric dam can power all of Africa. If we had our own access to our resources, we would have everything. And what that would mean for the rest of the world, that you had to fend for yourself. And make some alliances if you really want some of the things that Africa has. But that is what we have to struggle for. And there's no compromise on that. That African people require our own power. That we have to live in our own interests. We cannot produce and reproduce life for the oppressor while we are not experiencing the life reproduction ourselves. When our children are getting murdered in the street, when you got 1 million Africans who can die within the course of a month and nobody bats an eye. So, there was a couple things that I wanted to hit on before I left, but yeah, so the party is a revolutionary organization. The African People's Party, Socialist Party, is a revolutionary organization. It has branches right here in New York. I'm from Maryland, which, by the way, is one of the slave breeding capitals of the world, of the United States. That after they cut off the importation of enslaved Africans, that they bred them out in what's in the Maryland, Virginia area. So you'll see the most diverse Africans in that area. And that some of the most revolutionary characters, Harriet Tubman and others, are from that area as well, one a powerful sister. And so, our work is not to just look at history and say, damn, that's bad. Our work as African people and people who are in solidarity with the African Revolution has to be a part of the work, has to be engaged in organizing ourselves and other people to make the revolution a real thing and make socialism a real thing in the world. Because socialism in pockets don't work. Communism in pockets don't work. We've seen it. Cuba, Venezuela, many countries in Africa who were fighting for a socialist revolution in the 1960s and 70s. Doesn't work because world capitalism still exists. It's not about a national liberation. It's about an African liberation that's going to free up the whole entire world, and it has to be one that's going to right the entire system and remove the pedestal of parasitism that white people enjoy.
Can we just give another hand for President Yejide Orunmila? That was incredibly dynamic. I really salute you, President Yejide. And we're almost at the end here, but I just wanted to say that if, for all the white people in here, if you agree with what Yejide was saying, if you agree with Penny's presentation, if you think reparations is owed to all African people, you should become a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. We are an organization you can join for as low as $25 for the year as a membership, and we have various levels, $100 a month, $20 a month. There's so many ways that, as low as $10 for the whole year, you can become a member of USM. You can participate in actions. This was us in Boston at a parade. We made, marching past Harvard University. Harvard owes reparations. And I just really want to put that call out there. You can talk to us after, and we have a table downstairs. You can learn more. And the resources of our membership go towards all of, the incredible Black economic development projects of the Uhuru movement. And I wanted to show a brief video of the Black Power Blueprint, which Penny had some images of before. We do have some brand new literature on them. They're building venue spaces and community centers in St. Louis. And it's just really beautiful to see where the money goes in our organization and what reparations looks like physically, because you can go to St. Louis, you can touch the walls and see, like, that brick is my reparations. That flagpole, there's a 50-foot flagpole flying in red, black, and green. So I just wanted to show that briefly, and then we can have a discussion. We have plenty of time for questions or comments or just anything you want to share after this. So I'm just going to play this, and then we can open it up. And also, just a call for membership. We have a goal for this weekend of raising $200 towards the Black Power Blueprint. We've made around 30 so far. And if you're interested in contributing or becoming a member, please talk to me after. You can find our table downstairs for Uhuru Planet, and we'd love to discuss more. So let me play this video. And also, thanks for we have like over 20 people tuning in online. This is being live streamed on the Uhuru Solidarity Movement Facebook page, facebook.com/Uhuru Solidarity, so you can share this live stream, follow us there. So let me play this video here. I hope the sound, I'm not sure what the sound situation is, but, oops. It's just from my computer, so.
North of the infamous Delmar Divide is the other St. Louis, where 70% of those living in poverty are African, and hunger is a daily reality. The Black Power Blueprint has brought real hope back to this community, opening up opportunities for economic development and the revival of African culture, for which St. Louis is famous. Last year, with tremendous worldwide support and community volunteers, an abandoned and dilapidated building at 4101 West Florissant was rapidly transformed into a thriving Uhuru House Community Center. Condemned buildings across the street from the Uhuru House were demolished, and the lot will soon be paved and fenced with lighting for the One Africa, One Nation community marketplace. A 50-foot flagpole was erected on this land, flying a 25-foot red, black, and green African flag. Renovations on the third floor of the Uhuru House are wrapping up for additional office and program space, with insulation, drywall, and mudding and taping. In the next few weeks, the wiring, plumbing, and flooring will be completed in a fourplex apartment building, earmarked for housing for our African Independence Workforce Program, creating jobs for those re-entering our community from the prison system. We will upgrade all bathrooms and kitchens, install stoves, refrigerators, cabinets, and fixtures, and the apartments will be furnished. Other projects for Phase 3 include architectural plans, new roofing, and new windows for the beautiful Chico Kitchen, located in an Art Deco building on Goodfellow Boulevard that had once been a boat dealership. As our most ambitious project so far, Chico will include a cafe, bakery, community kitchen, and the headquarters of Ubuntu Foods and Pies, one of the 26 economic institutions of the Black Star Industries and African People's Education and Defense Fund around the U.S.
This is not just to set up some kind of institution. This is a project in the hands of the African working class. And the class has to have power for us to be free.
This life-changing project is coordinated by Deputy Chair Ona Zane Ishita.
It is really inspiring to see how much the people love this project and looking forward to the marketplace and all the other projects. This is a positive response to gentrification because it's about more than just keeping our community. It's about building economic self-reliance for our community. The Black Power Blueprint is economic power in the hands of the African working class. Donate to this unique project, which is changing your world day by day.
All right. Yeah, and this really beautiful. This video is from January, so already since then this video is outdated, and in our new brochures you can see the whole new phases they have. And just to end here, oops, nope, sorry. Nope, sorry. I'm gonna turn on the lights, and if you have a question or comment, just we can do popcorn style. I can MC, and then Yejide and Penny are here for them. So yes.
Yesterday. Okay. In the plan, at what point do I, a West American, get my own identity? So I understand that we have a connection to Africa, but I'm not African. The African people are African. They have their own language. They have their own culture. I was born in Jefferson City, Missouri, with a different culture and a whole different thing. So at what point are we going to come up with something that gives me my identity and addresses my history and culture? Because mine is not the same as Africa.
Well, mine is not the same as yours either, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York. You know what I mean? Because the culture of African people is not a homogeneous culture, and it changes wherever we are. There won't be an African American reparations.
I'm not African American.
What are you?
Doas.
What is that?
A descendant of an American slave.
Okay.
Because, and the theory behind that is that I can't ask myself to disregard a significant portion of myself. Okay, it's summer out and I live in New Orleans, so I'm kind of dark right now. But trust me, there's a lot of cream in this coffee. In addition to that, you want to add the Native American that's in me. So we're going to write all that off. I am literally the child of the marriage of Native American, European, and African intersection. So at what point do I get to be who I am?
I think at the point where you recognize that your Native ancestry, your African ancestry, were both slaughtered by your white ancestors.
Right.
And that we recognize that regardless of how you see yourself, your history is African, your history is Native. And so it comes, you are not, there was no such thing, there's no such person as a slave. Okay? There's no such person as a slave. Those were African people who were enslaved by white
Okay, we can
Europeans.
say enslaved people, but my point is,
Right.
that's where I come from, and I am
You did
quite,
not come from.
wait, hold on. I am really tired
Okay.
of people trying to minimize
Okay.
what we've accomplished here. So it's no one wants to be. We want to connect connect with something bigger than ourselves. And I think personally we're big enough, because do you know what it took the universe to get people, our DOAS people, into this room today? Because we're talking about, we are the survivors of people that lived in a 5x7 box for months in their own excrement and urine. My people have lived through enslavement and Jim Crow and prison industrial complex, and yet I'm still here. So therefore, I have DNA running through me that not a whole lot of people, 45 million other people have. So I want to celebrate that. I don't want to say I need to be African in order to be. And I'm not saying I'm not African, because a large part of me is. However, Africa doesn't want me. They've had 153 years to come and get me. They're like, nope.
They weren't in a position to do that process. They were going through
So,
this.
to answer your question, I think I really done that, is that I don't want to discount how you feel you experience this world and your own ancestry. But our position in the African People's Socialist Party is that we are all one people. That the reason why we are scattered all over the place is not because of our own doing, but because of what white imperialism has done to us. That's why we speak these different languages. We are incorporated into these different cultures because of the displacement of African people that was due to the attack on Africa, and that you, in that process, have a right to claim Africa. You have a right to claim even your square of wherever you said that you were from. I'm sorry, I forgot what that was. But African people require liberation, and we're going to get that liberation. And we find power in associating with every single black person on the planet, because when we don't do that, we now minimize ourselves. And so there's power in connecting with the brother or sister who is from Cameroon, from Jamaica or the Caribbean or South America somewhere, Canada, Europe, whatever African people are, there's power, because now we see our sense of sameness and our sense that came out of a destruction of our entire being. You know, we were living fine on the continent of Africa before white people came and decided that we don't deserve to be there, that we deserve to be somewhere else working for them for hundreds of years and creating this whole wealth that is based on our oppression, your oppression. And so, you know, in the African People's Socialist Party, we recognize that in order for you to be free, in order for me to be free, that we have to destroy imperialism, we have to destroy capitalism in order to get.
I think we're talking about two entirely different things.
Okay.
I'm not saying that I don't agree with you in destroying. I'm talking about, where do I get, who defines my identity, and when do I get to celebrate my history? Because the things that we're talking about, I think one of the problems we have in this country as a DOAS community is that we run from our history. We're told that it's not something to be proud of and to live in. I embrace it. Again, do you know what it took for the universe to get me here in this moment today?
Yes,
So I'm like, why wouldn't we celebrate that?
I think we're not talking about two different things. And I think that we are celebrating the fact that we're making a revolution to free our people. Because right now, just to celebrate it underneath capitalism is not the way to go. And it's not even saying that, yes, we all survived. We're all here because, you know, obviously somebody had to survive the terror that was waged against African people. And we've done extraordinary things, but that still does not say that I'm different from an African who also braved extraordinary things on the continent of Africa just to live and to organize with me and to embrace me when I go there, and for me to embrace them. I don't want to just, so I think you're going to have to define your own self, but in this work, in the work that we are involved in, we embrace all Africans, and we want Africans to seek liberation. We want Africans to be free. And we're going to organize with each other to make that happen.
I think we organize together. But I also think you, and I need to be me. And so that doesn't mean that we can't work together. That doesn't mean we don't have things in common. But it does mean you are you and I am me. And I have not felt from our community that we celebrate the uniqueness that is DOAS. If we do that.
Well, there's a couple things. One person said, like, if a tree falls into the river and it stays there for like 100 years or whatever, it's still a tree. And I think Malcolm said, I'm misquoting, like if a person is in the oven, it doesn't make them a biscuit or something like that. We were dragged from the continent, brought over here, slavery, just like brothers in Angola and brothers in Africa, like us, like happening. And there's a lot of work to do. We have to recognize what the problem still is in order to really get free. I think that now we get caught up in this whole this philosophical thing and so on and so forth, as opposed to focusing on the whole issue of becoming self-determining and what it takes in order for that to happen. And I wanted to just say something to Penny. With the McDonald's situation, she got her coffee, she put it in her legs, and they was driving on, spilled. Because she put it in her legs, like maybe she was in the back, she didn't have a cup holder or whatever, but she put it between herself. And just to go to show the difference in like how white is recognized in court and so on, versus like if a black person like myself walks out of here and gets snatched up by the police and accused of something with no evidence, I'm going to 10, 15 years, I'm going to die in there. And a matter of, you know what I mean, in this system that we talking about, slavery, it's a valid term, but political prisoners is pretty much more accurate. It would seem to me that being called a political prisoner, those people that were dragged away slaves or something like, it brings somebody holding about, buck dancing and serving julep tea. We're political prisoners, we was fighting, all right, and we need to keep fighting. As opposed to like, this whole thing about getting all philosophical, ADOS, I don't know what
ADOS is American descendants of slaves. Just don't ask.
So how does that any different from the people that are going through what they're going through, catching the same hell in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, under the same system of white power, European colonial domination?
There's a real answer to that, because I think that once you know who you are, no one can take that from you. One of the reasons we're free to, we are where we are.
But they took our self-determination. That's what we have to fight for.
But they didn't take our minds. They did not take our minds. That's the one first thing they took.
All right. I just wanna make sure that we're not going back and forth, and that we have everybody have an opportunity to speak. So I appreciate the dialogue. Was there another question?
Yeah, there were some hands back here. I think you, and then you as well. Do you want to go? Yeah.
If I can, if I can defer to a sister who may want to say something, and then say something. I don't know. A lot of national energy right now.
I just wanted to mention there is a big African festival happening at Berry Park, I think the name is.
Commodore Berry?
Commodore Berry,
Yeah.
4 days, July 4th through 8th.
Yeah.
And I think they'd love to hear from Penny, and I tried to go, I asked somebody, I said, can I go? I think I was the only white person that went. They're like, yes, you can, even though she told me, no, I shouldn't go the first time. But that is a discussion maybe everybody could weigh in on with this kind of heartfelt understanding, like, well, yes, no, now and then in the corner, But how are we going to work together? Because there are avenues, that's what I'm hearing, for people, whatever skin color, to pull together. And then there's another woman, I think her name was Jessica Washington, and she was a one-woman play, and it was just performed. It was about the black woman, unfortunately, who was put to death, I think, in Georgia in like 1950, for being raped by her former employer, and yes, and yet a 5-minute jury, and it was heartbreaking. She's from this area, so that was pretty powerful to put on network.
Jesse Williams, you said Jessica Williams.
She's the actress. The actual name, you have to Google. I put it on my blog, lidfully.org, because I saw it performed up in Connecticut, and then it got to the next level. But it's a one-woman play. I've seen Harriet Tubman play. So sometimes the arts speak to everybody's, and these festivals. So
yeah, if you definitely want to talk to us about joining the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. We do have people here in New York.
Well, I can, but I'm just saying maybe they could have a presence at the festival.
We'll be
out there.
Okay,
We'll
so
be
there.
out there.
Great.
I'll be really quick. I just wanted to add on to both presentations was powerful, and y'all said a lot of things that just sparked some thoughts. But the breeding of slaves that took place because of cotton became in the early 1800s. Cotton became what they say the king, and so in the Deep South, you know, it became the cotton economy, and so because the Atlantic slave trade was banned or abolished, that's why they started breeding the slaves in Virginia and Maryland and so forth. But there was a fight to bring the Atlantic slave trade back right before the Civil War. They were actually debating on bringing the Atlantic slave trade back. So, you know, that might have happened if the Civil War never happened. And then the convict leasing, they also had peonage in the South as well, where, you know, which was that slavery.
And leasing, I think, right?
Yeah, peonage laws, what they call it, the convict leasing. I won't go deep into that, but also the Congo. You brought up the Congo. I think the statistics they have is 10 million African people were killed over a 20-year period under King Leopold's rule. And millions of African people are still dying in the Congo. Like the Congo could be Wakanda now if it wasn't for this relationship with Europeans. But that's really all I had, and I wanted to appreciate the talk and appreciate the chairman and the philosophy, the theory of African internationalism that brings African people all over together. You know, understand that capitalism is was born as a global economy.
Yeah. Sure. Yes?
Thank you to everyone, all the presenters and the questions. I think I'm an educator, so the history to me, I bring this history into my teaching quite often, and I think it is so distinct from so much of our standard curriculum. I'm curious about what this group's, or sort of how this group is operationalizing of reparations and whether or not that happens through the state or outside of the state. Like, is it, you know, where's the leverage point, or where did you see the leverage point, and where do you encourage those leverage points to be? So is it about encouraging collective movements among white people to give money and land, or is it about pressuring states to give, you know, kind of the operationalizing?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Because it's really every front. And what we organize just among regular, everyday white people, and we have organization in, I think, 23 cities in the United States who are the Solidarity Movement. We have every year the Day of Reparations to African People, where we speak, and that's in maybe 10 or 11 cities that we have that, and it's really, really, really exciting. So we organize just among regular people, but we also have a campaign going to the money sector, going to people who have inheritances and or own corporations. For example, like Cliff Bar, everybody's heard of that. They're going to come to St. Louis and plant a community garden, or bring the resources for that to Buckner Blueprint. So, you know, all of it. And then if the state, if the city of St. Louis, say, and that's only one of the places where the Healing Movement is, wants to give a grant with no strings, that could go there. You know, we want people to give solar panels and trees, and the south side of St. Louis is like a forest. The north side is no trees. I mean, just everything. So all the sectors, and ultimately, I think that it's really important and interesting that the Democratic Party and all in the mainstream media, they're raising the question of reparations now. But it was the African People's Socialist Party that said that when nobody would support it.
Yeah.
So there may be a time when the U.S. government will have to give a certain amount. But that's not going to be a revolution or anything like that. They're not going to give, as Yejide said, that everything that they have. But they might do something. They might be forced to do it from the people's movement. But as the chairman says, as African people begin to see that everything is owed to them, it's just going to change. It's becoming a mass movement. Really.
Mahru. Who else had a question? I think you, and then, did you still have a question? You had your hand up earlier. Okay. If you'd like to go, and then, did you want to speak again?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask.
Okay. And did you have another question? I just want to make sure I get everyone. Oh, okay. Okay, do you ask your question?
I was just going to say,
actually have a party configuration in South Africa. We actually have the African Nationalist Organization in the continent in Cameroon. And we also have members of our organizations in Sierra Leone, in Kenya. So we're throughout Africa.
Nigeria?
We have some contacts in Nigeria, but we haven't developed a party formation there yet. We have the Secretary General of African Socialist International, which is the international configuration of the party, is from Congo and is organizing in Congo right now. But as you said, there are things that are undermining the work because of imperialism is hard, fast at work to undermine our people. But even as Africa as we turn our attention to Africa, we don't discount what's happening here or anywhere else in the world. That domestic colonialism is real here, and the same sort of COINTELPRO type programs that are happening on the continent of Africa happens right here in Flatbush, Brooklyn, in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Florida. And so that's why it's really important that we that as we look at the international scope, that we also recognize that colonialism is the state here, in the school system, in the police, and whatever other thing, because we don't have power here in any shape, form, or fashion, and especially not in the criminal justice system where African people are deeply penalized more than anybody else.
We have just a couple of minutes left before we close out. Any final comments or questions?
Yeah, something to ask. Would you want to ask a question?
No, not necessarily a question. I just wanted to commend the presentation that we had today to help clarify for us and others what the African Revolution is, ideologically as well as practically on the ground in terms of institutions we must build, and to understand that we don't understand, parasitic capitalism and colonialism, and everything will confuse us. And our oppression has been political, it's been economic, but it's also psychological. Things that confuse us about who we are in terms of our own identity. And we don't understand history, that your identity comes from your place of origin. Okay, and Rafik was right. There's an African proverb says that if you can take a tree log and throw it in the river and come back 200 years later, it will not be a crocodile. And Malcolm said, in terms of this question of us, integrate into imperialism and capitalism is like chickens trying to integrate into an oven. So we have to find our own ground. You know what I mean? We know that that ground is Africa. Africa is key to the world. And before colonialism, and centuries before that, Africa was a great basket of work. In ancient times, it was called the land of the gods. That's how powerful the institutions and civilizations were. And everybody from Socrates and Pluto went to North Africa to learn their philosophy, about life. And that's what we have to liberate for ourselves, is our own culture, our own history, our own identity. Because without that, we won't know where to go. And why are we going there? And be on this land, this stolen land, stolen in blood and genocide. And even though we've been here for 500, 300 years, we're still African. And we want to go home, we're going home to a liberated Africa. You know what I mean? We're just not going there as tourists, etc. We have to liberate Africa. Because the liberation of Africa means the liberation of the entire world.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That's the point we want to make.
Yeah.
Everybody here. You know what I mean? And everybody look at Africa, and when we do things, people look at it as something narrow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or you being divisive. We are international people. Our philosophy is African internationalism. You know what I mean? And when we do things, and we've done things in the past, it has affected everybody on the planet. And this time, like James Baldwin said, the fire this time, black liberation this time, is going to liberate the entire world. That's our responsibility. We didn't ask for it. Europeans gave that to us when they came, kidnapped us and colonized us and dispersed us around the world. That became our responsibility, is to liberate the world, and in that process, to save life, to save the planet and to save life on the planet. That's for everybody.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody. But it has to be done under African internationalism. You know what I mean? It can't be done under bourgeois democracy and leftist socialism. It has to be done under African internationalism. And everybody needs to study African internationalism and what it means to everybody on the planet. You know what I mean? And it's your opportunity, and I'm talking to white people in the room, and I think Penny said it, it's your opportunity to join humanity. And stop being a parasite. You know, and stop making excuses for your privileges. Those privileges come at a price to the rest of the people on the planet. You know, from 13% of the world's population to dominate and control the rest of the people on the planet has actually stole the planet from the people on it. And we intend to change that. So you need to join without hesitation.
Yeah. In order for a white woman to go jogging in Washington Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, that created the heightened police presence and that policed the African community. So in order for a white woman to feel comfortable, just one, that the policing of an entire African community gets heightened. I just think you need to like I don't know if y'all even know Brooklyn, but like living here, like on Washington Ave, right across where the Brooklyn Museum is, it was hood, you know? And as soon as we saw white people, we was like, oh shit, here we go. We got mobile police units with cameras that are peering down on our community. My brothers who had lived there for 15 years were now being stopped and frisked by the police. I mean, these are the things that happen. And so even if you don't own a slave, you don't know nobody in your family who owns a slave, but just you protecting white power, imperialism, colonialism protects white people. White people are the police, whether you know it or not. You are the police. That when you, like in Washington, D.C., there's a thing with the go-go band. It was that the cellular phone store used to always play go-go. Go-go is the music that was created by Africans in Washington, D.C. As soon as white people, they used to blast it out of the store every day. White people was like, oh, this is a noise complaint. The man can no longer blast music that everybody else was enjoying because of one noise complaint by one white character who did not like the fact that Africans were actually playing music out loud. So, white power, white imperialism protects white people, whiteness, and you yourself are the police, even if you don't, and like I said, even if you don't recognize it, just, I think that's a little bit too loud, you're the police. Because whatever you say gets acted upon in a way that negatively affects African and other colonized people.
This has been an incredible discussion. I really appreciate Yejide and Penny again, and all the great feedback. We do have to end right now, but we're going to be tabling the rest of today and tomorrow. If you want to talk more, we'd love to have you. Our table is Uhuru Planet. We also have a contact list here. We'd love to get your info. If you, we can send you what we have, and copies of The Burning Spear for just $1. Oldest Black Power newspaper in print over 50 years. So thank you everyone for coming. Unity through reparation.